Good morning, everybody. Welcome to the Woodrow Wilson International Center for Scholars. My name is Abe Denmark. I'm the director of the Asia program. We're delighted and honored to welcome two very important voices on Asia policy in the United States, the chair and ranking member of the Senate Foreign Relations Subcommittee on East Asia, Senator Cory Gardner from my home state of Colorado, and Senator Edward Markey from Massachusetts. Thank you both for being here. Happy Valentine's Day.
This is a great way to spend it.
And we're just very pleased and honored that you'd be able to come here. I wanted to also express my personal congratulations to you both on the recent passage of the Asia Reassurance Initiative Act, which I know is a major effort for both of you to enhance American policy and American posture in Asia. I wanted to ask you, as a way to start, I wanted to ask both of you if you could talk a bit about what your understanding of the significance of that act and where you'd like to see, where you expect things to go from here.
Yeah, well, thank you, Abe, very much. And he's got the University of Northern Colorado book right here, so this is a home state hero right here. So thank you very much for the opportunity to be here. And I just want to start by saying this, though, as we talk about the Asia Reassurance Initiative Act and the work that we've done through the Foreign Relations Committee on the subcommittee, is that Ed Markey has been an incredible partner. And I think that through this process, we have shown what senators from both sides of the aisle can do together to accomplish a major foreign policy initiative, and do so with a lot of give and take, a lot of opportunity to make sure that everybody had their vision included. So it was Senator Markey and Senator Coons and Senator Kane and Senator Cardin, and it really was a team effort. And as we negotiated it through the House, too, to have that experience and the expertise of Senator Markey and others helping in the House, it really was remarkable. So, Ed, thank you for your incredible leadership. When I first traveled to Asia as the chairman of the subcommittee, the common theme, the refrain, what stood out so much was that we needed to up our game in terms of U.S. presence, that we needed to have this leadership not just by term or phrase or paper, but actual presence in the region, and to provide tools that we have but we weren't lending to or giving to or building in the region. Then I had spent shortly after that a little bit of time talking to General Breedlove at NATO in Europe, and we talked a lot about the Reassurance Initiative, the European Reassurance Initiative. And I thought, well, wait a minute, can we kind of construct this diplomatic version of a reassurance initiative for Asia that would build out our security cooperation, that would build out our economic opportunity, that would build our rule of law and democracy? That's kind of where it started, and the importance of it to move in that direction.
Terrific.
Yeah, so Senator Gardner is right. We partnered on this, Republican, Democrat. We said we should try our best to find a way of ensuring that in the region that there was a signal that was being sent that we cared, that we wanted to be involved, and that notwithstanding anything else that might be going on, that there were people in the United States House and Senate, Democrat and Republican, Gardner, Markey, just absolutely disparate on many issues, but on this, united, that we had to send a signal. So the legislation itself, which is now law, is $8.6 billion over 5 years, which is now going to be something which the State Department, which USAID, which where appropriate, the Defense Department can use in our relationship with countries in that region, so that there is something that can be used to counter the Chinese attempts to influence governments. And so from our perspective, it was important to fill the vacuum, to make a statement, to do it on a bipartisan basis. And so Cory and I tried our best to do this and to keep partisan politics out of it, just to focus on a very important national objective. And I just want to, again, just compliment Cory for his leadership on this issue.
That's great. And one of the aspects of American policy in Asia that I often talk to when I speak with foreign visitors is the broad bipartisan consensus that exists on a lot of aspects of American policy in Asia. And so I think your work together is an example of that. And I wanted to ask about China. Senator Markey, maybe you could start. The Trump administration, in their strategic documents, has identified great power competition, including with China, as a top priority for them. And I was wondering if you could speak about how you see competition with China, between the United States and China, working out, and what you see as sort of the key priorities within that competition going forward.
So clearly, there are multiple components to it. When we look at even the visit that the president's about to make to Vietnam, China and the United States aren't necessarily on the same page. And it could play a big role in whether or not North Korea actually feels the pressure they have to feel in order to reach an agreement that does begin a process towards denuclearization. So we just start right there in the summit that's about to come up, and the relief valve which the Chinese can provide economically that reduces the pressure, because their interests and ours are not necessarily aligned. When it comes to economic issues, clearly they are providing huge amounts of funding with strings attached to country after country. Part of the goal of Gardner Markey is to counter that, but clearly they don't really believe in rule of law. They don't believe in the values that we believe in, and so it's important for us to counter that, because we can see this clear trend where they believe that money talks. They can compromise the integrity, the direction of countries, and that's key for us. And then just stepping back, we have this whole issue of AI, of this rise of technology. We also, as part of our jurisdiction, have responsibility over cybersecurity. Well, we just can't turn a blind eye to the rapid development of technology, the use of it that China is making, and the need for us to have a plan. We don't have to be afraid of China, but if they have a plan and we don't have a plan, we're going to be in trouble. So there has to be an articulated plan, which we have in each one of these areas, that people in our country understand. Right now, I think in many of these areas, there is no clear appreciation for what we're trying to achieve in each one of these areas. Part of what we're doing is trying to clarify that, but from my perspective, we don't have to keep them out, but we do have to take them on. We have to have a plan, and if we do that, they're rivals, but they're ones that will then respect us in each one of the critical areas. Cory?
Yeah, I think this relationship, I look at it like a skipping stone, right? When you throw that skipping stone at the water, that smooth surface, every time there's a bounce in the relationship, there's going to be this ripple. And the ripple is the economic effect, the security effect, the trade effects that other nations feel around the globe. Ideally, the relationship between the United States and China would be one that is the calm at the end of the skip, where it's settled and everything is flowing and everything is moving, and you don't have that sort of disturbance that you see today. To do that, we're going to have to overcome quite a bit, and that's the whole purpose of Gardner Markey and the work that we're doing to provide strategic balance, strategic opportunities, a plan, funding for security cooperation. Look at what is happening in our hearing that we had just a month ago or so with the State Department witness, where it was revealed there could be up to 2 million people imprisoned in these re-education centers in China, the Uyghurs. who face these conditions that are intolerable. You look at what continues to happen in South China Sea and the militarization. You look at what happened when the Chinese protested South Korea's acceptance of THAAD and their willingness to basically cost the Korean economy 10, 11, 12 billion dollars because of South Korean interests in their security. And so we have to, every one of those is a ripple that hits and affects. And so how do we provide our allies in the region, how do we provide new partners with the balance they need as they look at the system that China is demanding and the system the United States and Western values have stood for, that we present that strong, articulate, stable vision of values that they can rely on and know versus being forced to turn to the only game in town that may be antithetical to their values or their ability to give opportunity to their people.
Considering all the issues in our relationship with China that the two of you have detailed just now, as we engage with the Chinese, as we engage with them on trade discussions, on all these other issues, the upcoming summit in Hanoi that Senator Markey mentioned, is there still room for cooperation between the United States and China? And if there, how do we cooperate with them while also simultaneously competing with them as well?
Well, the world will benefit with and through this cooperation, and I think it's important that we find those ways to do it. But right now, it is very difficult. I mean, if you look at just look at the trade situation that we are in right now. I remember visiting with a number of U.S. businesses in China in 2015, and these businesses were saying, well, give President Xi a chance. Give these reforms a chance. We think things are going to work themselves out. There's a reform opportunity here. A year later, these same businesses were in my office saying, things have not changed. They're getting worse. The United States needs to act. And so, when you have President Xi making rose garden comments that things will change, and then obviously you don't have the implementation on intellectual property theft or concerns of state-owned enterprises or the denial of market access, joint venture ownership requirements, emplacement of party activists in corporate boards, those are all going to have to be worked out. I'm not a big fan of tariffs. I think they're the wrong thing to do. So we have to rethink how we're associating with our allies, Europe, Southeast Asia, and others, to force a change of behavior, because not only does it hurt the U.S., but it hurts the other trade partners, nations around the globe who face the same kind of barriers that China is imposing.
When I look at China, one of the issues I look at is the United States, President Trump announcing that he's going to withdraw from the INF treaty. Well, there are implications over in Asia for that. There are implications in our relationship with China and with Russia. If we pull out, yes, on the one hand, perhaps the United States could start to deploy more weapons in that Asia region. But on the other hand, it could just trigger another arms race, another unnecessary arms race that's going to be very costly, not really provide any additional security, but just see the same kind of arms race that we have seen in past decades. So I would say it's better for us to try to find a way to cooperate to ensure that the INF and its removal doesn't wind up with the law of unintended consequences being invoked. Or maybe for some people it's the law of intended consequences that we have that arms race, because the maintenance of this rule-based, treaty-based world in which we've been living is very important. And ultimately, it'll allow the United States and China to focus upon other issues, economic issues, where we should be cooperating. So I would say, from my perspective, I would like to see cooperation on that. I would like the administration to try to work, tease this out, put it over separately, and then try to find a way in which we're doing our best to reach a reasonable resolution of this issue with Russia, but then as a consequence with the Chinese as well.
Very good. Thank you for that. I wanted to turn, if we could, to our allies and our partners in Asia. There's been polling over the last couple of years that, generally speaking, views of the United States, views of amongst the people of our allies and partners have been going down in recent years. Generally speaking, confidence in the United States, either because of China's rising power or perceptions, be they right or wrong, of American distraction or decline, seems to be raising questions about the sustainability and credibility of America's role in Asia amongst our allies and partners. So I wanted to get a sense, because you engage with these issues so much, what's your sense of the state of our alliances in Asia with Japan, with Korea, and also maybe some of our unofficial relationship with Taiwan and some of our other partnerships?
Well, I would say with Japan, obviously, as the president goes to the summit in Vietnam, they're still wondering, what is the objective of the United States? Is it to negotiate an agreement where North Korea does not have the ICBM capacity to reach the United States? And that would be a good deal for the United States, and Japan and other countries would still be vulnerable to shorter-range missiles. Japan doesn't know. We don't know what the negotiating position is. Would the shorter-range missiles still be allowed, and therefore they would be vulnerable? Is the goal to denuclearize North Korea, or is it to give them the ability to maintain a certain nuclear capacity? Japan doesn't know, and they would be more vulnerable, than we would. So I would say in the near term, that's a very important issue that has to be clarified. We actually don't know what the negotiating position or goal of the president is. And I would say the same thing is true for South Korea. They need to know what our goals are. And so as I look at the region, and I look at this summit coming up, I am afraid that that we might fall once again into the Kim family playbook, where they pocket concessions, they pay lip service to their own concessions that they have to make, and then ultimately they just continue on their same pathway. And I think these issues are right now more existential to South Korea and Japan than they are to us, in the absence of having an ICBM which is deployable that could strike us. And so I would put that near the top of the list, and we have to keep our allies close in this negotiation, but I think we also have to make it more clear what the objectives are.
Yeah. Well, look, I think the Gardner-Markey legislation reiterates our treaties, alliances throughout Asia, and really highlights the work that we are doing with every basic region in a country. Existing treaties calls for the centrality of ASEAN, the recognition of that, the need to enter into trade agreements and to develop strategies in Southeast Asia, terrorism in the Philippines and beyond, recognizes our the multiple allies treaties that we have, and so I think that's an important part of this legislation. Beyond that, I think, though, when you look at what is happening, the conversation I had with some leaders in Southeast Asia, I'll never forget, it was, where are the Bob Doles and the Danny Inaways? And that was kind of a comment that they made. We don't have the relationships with the United States that we used to have, and I think that's a really important factor. So Senator Markey, myself, and a number of others, Senator Schatz and Senator Sullivan and others, Senator Daines and Perdue, who spent time living in Asia, have, I think, a new opportunity to really build relationships with countries throughout Asia, this Indo-Pacific opportunity that we have to help reassure the allies and our friends that we're more than just rhetorical, and that we have tools now and opportunities to fund, to build, to enter into cooperative agreements with dollars behind it, whether it's security, whether it's cyber, whether it's trade, to strengthen and encourage these relationships. I think when it comes to South Korea, the relationship continues to be very strong. I worry a little bit about pressure being relieved on North Korea before denuclearization has occurred. Not just a little bit, I worry a lot about this, both making sure that we don't have a lifting of sanctions prematurely, because U.S. law is very clear. Only upon complete, verifiable, irreversible denuclearization will sanctions be lifted. With Japan, I think Senator Markey brings up a good point about what our objective is going into Hanoi. If it's to allow another chance to just, hey, we're really for denuclearization, let's meet again, that's just plain patty cake, and it's got to stop. And so I've told this to the administration, I do not believe the summit should occur if denuclearization, if there's no concrete steps toward denuclearization between now and then. Now, maybe that could be inspectors, maybe that could be some other thing, but why have another opportunity for Kim Jong Un to delay, to stall, to buy time? And that's got to stop. So, I'm concerned about Thailand in terms of the direction that they're heading and how our relationship is a critical partner with the United States, and how we rebuild this long-term relationship we've had. The South China Sea continues to be a problem. Vietnam, great opportunity for the United States. When I was in Vietnam this past year, the Carl Vinson had just been there. I spoke to so many people who I think they could actually recite the entire playlist from the band off of the carrier in order that they played. They were so excited that this carrier had made the stop in Vietnam. Opportunities for us to engage in a region to provide that strategic balance and counterpoint, but only with presence will this occur.
That's terrific. I was going to ask about North Korea, but you've both talked about it a bit, and the upcoming summit. I guess because you've already both discussed your expectations, your concerns about the upcoming summit, I guess I wanted to maybe take a step back from the summit itself and think more about North Korea broadly. The Director of National Intelligence testified that North Korea was not likely to willingly denuclearize, which seemed to fly in the face of some of the president's statements on the subject. Taking a step back from the upcoming summit itself, how do you see diplomacy going forward with North Korea? Well, I guess first, do you agree with the Director of National Intelligence and his assessment about North Korea's willingness to denuclearize? And if yes or no, how do you see things going forward from there in a realistic diplomatic strategy?
Mm-hmm. I do not think that North Korea has made a complete, resolved decision to denuclearize in the sense that we have in U.S. law. And that is why maximum pressure must be applied to the maximum extent, not just as it relates to North Korea and the regime, but as it relates to its enablers. We know that China continues to allow the flow of goods that are sanctioned, increased trade to North Korea. We know there are ship-to-ship transfers that are occurring illegally. We know that greater pressure by China could have an incredibly effective impact on North Korea's resolve to denuclearize. Senator Markey and I have legislation that we've introduced last Congress called the LEAD Act, which would really dramatically increase the pressure on North Korea and those who violate our sanctions regime as applied to North Korea. So I don't think that it is a good thing that we don't see missiles being launched. That is a good thing. But that didn't stop necessarily the computer modeling, the development of material, the science and research behind the engines and the modeling that could take place. So I think maximum pressure, there is a real chance that maximum pressure could slow walk back into strategic patience. And that's an unacceptable one.
Yeah, when we think about what progress would be, I think we would say, one, well, have they provided us an inventory in North Korea of what they have? Just give us a list. That hasn't happened. Is there any sense that they're going to allow any IAEA inspectors in just to look at it? No evidence of that as well. I mean, let's just contrast that with the Iran nuclear deal, where we had IAEA inspectors all over Iran. So this is a step below that, okay, a dramatic step below, because without inspections, then we have nothing. I mean, actually, an agreement without inspections is an hallucination, right? So we don't want the president to walk away from yet another meeting, saying, oh, we've made great progress and still have no agreement as to what North Korea is going to be specifically required to do that gives evidence of sincerity in their goal of reaching a peaceful resolution of this issue. So from my perspective, I remain a doubter. And again, our intelligence community is saying to us quite clearly that it is not their intention ultimately to give up their nuclear capability. I think we should respect that. I mean, these are professionals, and ultimately we should be guided by that intelligence in any conversations which we have with the North Koreans. So I'm not optimistic because all Kim is doing is just following what his father and his grandfather did, which is essentially a nuclear rope-a-dope strategy, that just allows them to continue progress on their program. And as Cory said, we introduced a very tough sanctions bill, very tough, because ultimately diplomacy has to be augmented by a tough sanctions regime. So that we make it clear that we don't want a military confrontation, but we do want a peaceful resolution. But without the pain that comes from a tough and then ever toughening sanctions regime, then the pressure probably isn't going to be there in order to get the results. So again, that's another area where Cory and I partnered in a bipartisan way just to send that signal that we think you have to be much more tough on these economic sanctions, Mr. President, towards the goal of getting the objective that you are seeking.
And it does seem like, to Ed's point, when he talked about the inspectors, the IAEA inspectors, there was an article here a couple of days ago in the paper that said, hey, maybe this will be on the table. And then the next day there's an article that says North Korea continues to stockpile nuclear material for this program. And so, the left and the right giveth and taketh when it comes to this. And so if you just go into this, and Ed's point, and the point that I made earlier too, we can't be strong enough. If this is a summit for the purpose of having another meeting, then it shouldn't, at least in my opinion, it should not occur.
Yeah, I think there's a reason to be concerned that we didn't send in the diplomats first, that we didn't, set the stage for this meeting. I think Kim wants to have the face-to-face without anything that has been put in place beforehand, and I think that's always something that we should cast an arched eyebrow towards, because we know he has an agenda, Kim. We know that he'd like to just have that face-to-face, but we're not sure that there are any concessions in the offing.
Last question on Korea. In Singapore, the president made a very dense public statement. One of his points being he would like to see the United States leave Korea in terms of withdrawing U.S. military power. There's a piece of recent legislation that was passed last year, I believe, in which the Congress set a floor to what they would like to see, what the Congress would like to see in terms of American power, military power on the Korean Peninsula. But there's always concern that the president may see U.S. posture in Korea as part of a diplomatic give and take. So I was wondering if you could comment a bit about the role that you see for the U.S. military in Korea and how you see it as a potential aspect of any diplomacy that we may be going in with the North Koreans.
Well, I think it'd be a massive, monumental mistake, a strategic, perhaps unparalleled in modern time, to have our troops leave the peninsula. Look, there may be a necessity for restructuring if there is denuclearization by North Korea. That's understandable. But I think for our purpose of U.S. security, our commitment to South Korea and the security of South Korea, our commitment to Japan and security, and our overall Indo-Pacific strategy, economically, from a security standpoint, relies on having a continued ability on the peninsula. I think this would be Congress did pass this into the Senate, I believe, in the Defense Authorization Act. I think that's where it was, expressing our opposition to a withdrawal. I think we need to make that loud and clear every time we get. I met with a number of National Assembly members from Korea yesterday who all expressed concern that the U.S. could do that, and I assured them that Congress will fight like hell against anything along those lines.
Yeah, from my perspective, I agree with Cory. This is just Ronald Reagan, trust but verify. This has to be step by step. If there's evidence of good faith on the part of North Korea, if it's clear that we're starting to move in the correct direction, if it's verifiable, if there's on-site inspections, if there's a palpable reduction in the risk, well, that's one thing. But unless and until that occurs, then it doesn't make any sense for us to relieve the pressure, either economically or militarily, along that border. That's what ultimately Kim is trying to achieve. He's seeking to reduce the military pressure we put on him, and he's also seeking to reduce any economic pressure so that he can continue business as usual, to move forward without actually having to change his own internal behavior. So that's just totally contrary to our goals. So I agree with Cory. It just doesn't make any sense.
That's great. The last question I wanted to ask you before we open up for Q&A is on your views of the role of Congress in shaping American foreign policy going forward, especially in the Indo-Pacific. Since our founding, Congress has had a very important role to play, but some have noted that in the last few years, Congress has been more direct in sort of setting the left and right limits of policy, setting the North Star, and being more engaged with setting the tone for foreign policy. I was wondering if you could speak a bit about how you think about this role, and especially going forward for the Indo-Pacific, where you think some of the areas are that the Congress may be focusing on going forward.
Yeah, no, I think Congress has and will continue to assert its voice in foreign policy. I think a lot of that is the leadership of Chairman Corker and Chairman Risch over the next couple of years. The members of the committee, I mean, this is Ed and I may be the only two who are not or have not run for president on the committee. I'm not sure. Are you running? You're not running, are you? Okay.
We're trying
to
make
news.
It's not 10 a.m. yet.
That's right.
There have been many people from Massachusetts who have run in the past. Cory and I are trying to maintain our unique status by being the only members not running for the presidency this year.
It is a very active committee, and a lot of people who want to see U.S. values remain that bright beacon for the world. You have a 4-year, 8-year presidency. And you have a Congress who's going to be around for, in perpetuity, and you have chairmen who are there for on the committee 6 years, on the committee longer, and so they can make that mark and they can continue to drive that mark, and I think that's what you've seen. And when it comes to something like Gardner Markey, you've seen really the first time ever Asia strategy put forward by Congress in a way that enshrines our values. Our understanding of security needs, our understanding of human rights, democracy, rule of law. The comments that we've seen from India, leadership in India, the defense minister in India, where we elevate the status of our relationship with India, the comments we've seen from the foreign minister in Australia about the legislation, the comments that we've seen throughout the region, throughout Asia as a result of this, it really shows the role that Congress can play in oversight, in setting strategy, requiring feedback through reports as they comply with this, and then we turn our efforts to implementation of efforts like these to make sure that the administration is carrying it out. And I think strong bipartisan voice can be not just bipartisan, bicameral, but across the government and end up with a very strong and solid position for a U.S. strategy. This could be the first shining example. May it spread around the country, around the world, excuse me.
Yeah. So this is my 43rd year as a member of the United States Congress. And what I've seen as each year has gone by is ever increasing efforts by White House staff, by State Department staff, to aggregate the power of determining the foreign policy of the United States without congressional involvement. In fact, they see the Congress as a constitutional impediment to doing whatever they feel like doing. So, as each year goes by and the stakes get higher, the United States Congress, the Foreign Relations Committee, Cory and I, we have to ensure that there's accountability. Infallibility is a very elusive human quality, okay? And it tends to be something that people,
But
when
often
they
achieved.
oh yeah, when they get that power in the White House, State Department, Defense Department, for even a brief period of time, that you need the checks and balances which are built into the Constitution. So from my perspective, just having the hearings, making them come up, making them explain what they're doing, knowing already what the objections are, just has a tendency to empower people who may have lost the debate internally to have their voices heard once again before the members of the Senate Foreign Relations Committee or other committees just begin to excoriate them in public for missing obvious defects in their strategy. So I've found that's always had a salutary impact, and I think increasingly in a dangerous world, we're just going to have to continue to maintain and in particular areas increase the oversight which we have.
Great. As a former DoD official, that was something I did not identify with at all. I have time to open up for a few questions, a few guidelines. For questions, please identify your name and your affiliation. Please keep your questions short. We're going to collect a few each round, and please make sure your question actually ends with a question mark. Yes, sir, in the front. And we have microphones that'll be coming around.
Eddie Wilson, National Democratic Institute. Speaking outside of your specific committee, do you see in this Congress the backsliding of democratic nations in the Indo-Pacific, specifically in Southeast Asia, as a problem that's going to require more engagement and more funding or less?
Okay. I think there's a question right behind you.
Borrow your pen.
Yeah. Chia Cheng with United Day News Group, Taiwan. So Senator Gardner and other Republican...
Can I just answer that? Inside of the boundaries of Gardner Markey, we actually put in $1 billion for democracy promotion in the Asia region. Because we can see what's going on in Cambodia, we can see what's going on in the Philippines, we can see what's going on in other countries in that region. So we actually specifically make clear that we believe that that's a very important objective that we have to advance with the rise of authoritarianism. There has to be a U.S. presence, a goal, a voice which we're using, and out of the 8.6 billion, 1 billion is actually specifically targeted towards that goal. Yes.
Great.
No, go ahead. I'll go ahead. Yeah.
Oh, sorry.
We're going to collect a few questions. And
Oh, okay.
I see what you did.
we always have time for democratization.
Okay, good.
Okay. So then, Senator Gardner and other Republican senators have sent a letter to Speaker Pelosi to invite President Tsai to address joint session. I wonder, Senator Markey, if you would urge Speaker Pelosi to send such invitation to. And for Senator Gardner, some scholars like Richard Bush and Susan Shirk have expressed their concerns over such invitation that would damage U.S.-China relationships. Can you respond to their concerns? Thank you.
I would answer, in your question to me, no. I would say no. And,
Let me collect one more.
okay, good.
And then we'll go ahead. Here in the front again. Yeah.
Thank you. Rita Chen from Central News Agency, Taiwan as well. I just want to follow up the letter. After Senator Gardner, after the letter that you sent to the Speaker Pelosi, the Chinese former ambassador come to visit you immediately. I'm just wondering that during your meeting, do you think the Chinese side understand your firm position on supporting Taiwan? How did he respond to your position? Thank you.
Thank you.
So questions on democratization and several questions on Taiwan.
Great, thank you. Ed. So look, on democratization issues, Ed's exactly right. I mean, this is why we have the language in the bill that we do and the funding behind it. Look, when we talk about three pillars in Gardner Markey, you have security, economy. rule of law, democracy, human rights is the third pillar. We reference Freedom House language within the legislation, the reports. We deny funding, for instance, in the Philippines, to the national police for violations of human rights until it's certified that they're no longer doing this. We put money and dollars behind young leaders in Southeast Asia to have opportunities to travel and experience Western values, U.S. leadership. And it really is an incredibly important part of who we are. I was in Vietnam meeting with the legislature and other leaders in Vietnam during the time that the data decisions were being made, localization decisions were being made there, and expressed concerns about what that means from a human rights perspective and what it means from a privacy perspective and civil society perspective. And so those are things that I think we always have to drive home, and that's what's important about this legislation. As far as Taiwan, I think the United States has a history of inviting democracy leaders, voices, to speak before the United States Congress. Not necessarily as the leader of a particular country, but as a leader of democracy and freedom. And when it comes to Taiwan, it's in line with U.S. law, the Taiwan Relations Act, the Taiwan Travel Act, the efforts we've made for high-level visitations. I think this is all something that we can pursue according to our law and the need to show our resolve and strength as it relates to our relationship with Taiwan. The Gardner-Markey legislation requires regularized sales to Taiwan of defense equipment. This is strengthening our relationship and ups the I think determination of the United States as it relates to Taiwan's presence around the world in participating in organizations and international bodies. And so we'll continue to do what's right. In terms of my conversation with the former ambassador, I think the ambassador has some wrong statistics as it relates to what the people of Taiwan believe. If the people of Taiwan don't support the position of Taiwan in a democracy, they can replace their leadership, but I don't think that will happen.
Senator Mark.
Oh, I'm fine. I answered it. I didn't. I broke the rules. I answered as the questions were coming. Yes.
Okay, well, let's do in the back there, Emma. Yeah.
Good morning. I'm Peter Smallwood, University of Richmond. The conversation so far has really been heavily focused on China issues and Korea issues, but Indo-Pacific's really big. So I'm curious for each of you what you regard as the next most important issue, either from concern about threat or recognizing a potential opportunity.
It's a great question. I'll take one more in the back there. The woman with the yeah.
Good morning. I'm Veronica Cartier, think tank for nuclear policy. In regard of Indo-Pacific strategy, considering that China's primary goal is to get Indonesia, which is the largest Asian country, and the second is that China latest technology as nuclear submarine and unmanned carrier for torpedoes, we have to consider of more of military, U.S. military presence close in Java Sea around the Strait of Malacca. Do you think that would be possible to be brought to the Congress as soon as possible? Because in order of miscalculation. Thank you very much.
A third and final question. Right here on the.
Hello, I'm with South Korea's Yonhap News Agency. I just wanted to ask a follow-up on your remarks about possible troop withdrawal from the Korean Peninsula. You said that there should be no withdrawal without progress in North Korea's denuclearization, but what about the prospect of withdrawal after a peace treaty is signed? Are you for or against withdrawal after a peace treaty? Thank you.
Senator Markey.
Does the peace treaty involve any on-site IAEA inspections? Does it involve an absolute agreement that there will be no ICBM capacity to reach the United States? Does it involve Kim beginning a process of opening up his country to more trade, more outside relations? All of that's going to be important. Okay, the details matter, and in the absence of knowing specifically, what Kim might promise as part of that treaty, a peace treaty, I don't think it would be wise for us to reduce our military presence. That's real pressure. But we have to see in return real action that is taking place in order to deal with the real concerns that our allies in that region and we have about that government.
Yeah, I think obviously we must respect the sovereignty of Korea. I mean, this is a relationship that is built on that respect with the United States, Korea. I would hope that we could, if there's a denuclearization agreement reached, and if it's even the most perfect sense of denuclearization, everything is exactly what perfect denuclearization would look like, I would hope that Korea and the United States could come to an agreement that would allow a presence to remain. I think it is that important. But obviously that's a determination that the alliance would have to work through, and determination of that, even if we have in a perfect world, denuclearization as we would wish it to be, I think continued U.S. Involvement presence is critically important for the security of Korea and the alliance. As it relates to China militarization issues, I think one of the challenges that we recognize in Gardner Markey is the need to build up security cooperation with our allies. We authorize $1.5 billion a year through basically this idea that we worked with Senator McCain and PACOM, Indo-Pacific, with Asia Pacific Security Initiative, which would allow us to partner with nations on training, equipment, maritime domain awareness, capacity building within the military, counterterrorism activities. And so this really is the implementation of this is actually absolutely critical for addressing the concerns that you just identified. On the Indo-Pacific, it is a big Indo-Pacific. I mean, that's why the legislation recognizes elevation of status as it relates to India. It's why we talk about the Quad and the importance of the Quad within the legislation. This is why we reiterate the importance of identifying where the next South China Sea is going to be. I mean, is it going to be over in Thailand? Is it going to be somewhere else? I mean, how do we identify a problem before it becomes a problem and act before it is too late? What are we going to do and continue in Myanmar? The human atrocity that continues to occur there. How do we address this? We recognize the need for that and the funding within this legislation to accomplish that. We recognize opportunities for trade deals. I was a supporter of the Trans-Pacific Partnership. I made a joke that I told a group of members from the Diet that if we just renamed it the TTPP, the Trump Trans-Pacific Partnership, then maybe we would get it approved. And about 6 months later, that same group of members came back and they told me we should just rename it TTPP. And I said, no, you can't use my jokes. So I think if we recognize the need for more trade agreement, we authorize $100 million in Gardner Markey for cyber agreements, for cybersecurity agreements. And so, I mean, look, this is a very comprehensive soup to nuts bill that engages the Indo-Pacific, because it is. And why is this important? We had a hearing with Randy Forbes, I believe it was, Congressman Forbes from Virginia. And in his opening statement, he said, this is an area of the world that will soon have 50% global population, 50% global GDP, that 2/3 of the world will travel to, that 70% of goods will transit, that contains the largest standing armies in the world, and most of our treaties and defense allies are there. And this is important stuff that we can't ignore. And I think this is realization that we've got to step up our game.
And I just, to your question about opportunities, that's what our bill's about.
Yeah.
You're right. We can talk about China all day,
Yeah.
or Korea, or Japan. Our bill's really about every other country. That's what our bill's about. Our bill's about not forgetting them, making them feel important, giving assets to the State Department, to USAID, to the Defense Department where it's necessary, so that they can build relationships with these countries, so that we can counter what China is doing. To a certain extent, it is all about China, but on the other hand, it's about our own bilateral relationships with these countries who can be forgotten in that rivalry that we have with China. So that's really what we tried to do, to fill the vacuum. You know, there used to be an old cartoon, it was called Pogo, and Pogo used to say, we're faced with insurmountable opportunities. And that's how we see this, okay? How do we take advantage of all these incredible opportunities in all of these countries who want to be our friends, who want to have the United States in because we play by rule of law. They know they can trust us. They know that there isn't going to be any gamesmanship or duality in our relationship where the ultimate goal is just to ultimately control that country's economy or political agenda. So that's how we see it. It's not any one country, it's every one of those countries. We give them, in the State Department, $8.6 billion to try to use it in an effective way to keep us in the game. And we're not going to have to match China dollar for dollar, because we don't have to. Because in many instances, they'd rather do business with us. They'd rather have a relationship with us because we're offering them more independence, more freedom, more opportunity. And that's what Gardner Markey was all about in the first place.
That's right. Well said.
That's great. You know, in times like we're living in now, having the opportunity to bring together two leaders from different sides of the political aisle to come together and discuss issues is such an important thing. And I'm so grateful to both of you for coming and speaking with us today. You're right that this region, the Indo-Pacific, is so important for our country. And I'm very pleased that we have the two of you in the Senate driving policy forward. So thank you very much for your leadership in the Senate, and thank you for coming.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Thank you all.
Thank you.